Today, I'm excited to have guest Stacey Danheiser on the program. Stacey is the founder of Shake Marketing, a fractional CMO consultancy for Fortune 500 B2B businesses in the technology and telecommunications space. She has also founded Soar Marketing Society, an exclusive community for professional B2B marketers who are looking to elevate their impact. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, our podcast is really focused on the whole fractional CMO space and how fractional CMOs can help businesses. And I'm excited always to have other fractional CMO guests on the program. And I was hoping that, you could give the audience a little bit more of an expanded introduction of yourself. What was your kind of career trajectory in marketing before you became a fractional CMO?
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's see. I'll go way back. I always loved kind of the marketing and sales side, even when I was in middle school and high school. And so I knew I wanted to get into business. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but took one marketing class, fell in love with it, and then ended up getting a degree in marketing. And so my first job out of college was in consumer marketing, actually. So I started in the cable industry, and I spent probably 6 years working at different consumer companies in the cable and retail financial services spaces, mostly for big Fortune 500 companies. And then I switched over to B2B, also for another Fortune 500 company, and really got my feet wet kind of between the marketing and sales function, built strategies, built execution plans, spent sort of equal time in strategy and execution. So I got a really well-rounded education and experience there. Did one more stint at a financial services company just to, figure out and see, I think a lot of times we start, especially in marketing, you start within one industry and it's really difficult to move into another industry. And so I wanted to see, work on the B2B side, but in a different industry. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I ended up leaving and starting my own consulting firm. And it started off with mostly doing customer research, doing some big kind of marketing strategy building for companies, including some of my past employers. And then it has expanded since then to kind of this fractional CMO part where I have a big piece of my business is consulting, where I still come in and kind of do projects, a lot of customer research, a lot of marketing strategy building. But then some organizations, especially in those kind of scaling organizations, to stay on and play more of a heavy role in overseeing the execution of the strategies that I'm building. And so and those have been really rewarding experiences because they don't necessarily know what to do, they don't know how to do it. And so it's been great to build the plan and the strategy and then bring on the team and educate the team and mentor the team. And so that's kind of the Soar Marketing Society, as you mentioned, kind of evolved out of that, which is a place for B2B marketers to come and connect, and really that we have a shared sort of vision and goal, which is to help elevate the profession, help marketers think and act more strategically so that they get a seat at the leadership table, so that they can help explain what marketing is and what it's not. Because I think a lot of times, especially in smaller or scaling organizations, you have the CEO running marketing, they don't really have a marketing background, and really that function ends up becoming kind of a tactical executor or order taker,
For
unless
sure.
you have somebody kind of overseeing the strategy. So that
Yeah,
is
that's
me in a
great. There's a
nutshell.
lot to unpack there. No, there's a lot to unpack there, which is great. I'm curious, as you look back and your experience with all these different companies, both on the consumer side, the B2B side, where was it that you think you made the greatest impact? Where was it that sort of, the light bulbs went off and said, this marketing stuff really works?
Yeah, I mean, for sure on the consumer side, what's really different for, working in B2C versus B2B is we had really big budgets. I mean, I was managing multi-million dollar budgets, pretty young and early in my career. And we didn't have to fight for every single dollar.
Mhm.
It was very well known sort of in the organization. Sales are down. We need sales to be up. Let's do a marketing campaign. Here's some money. Let's go. And we were very deadline driven. It was very fast paced. It was a lot of fun. We were doing commercials and radio spots and sponsorships and just really big things. And then I went over to B2B, and it was completely different. Majority of the budget is actually given to sales, to hire
Yes.
salespeople. And so but I loved working with the sales team. And so I kind of figured out early on to build a relationship with the sales team. And so I think, one of the most sort of rewarding parts of my career was that first job that I had in B2B, where I had to work with the sales team, and they were looking to me, to drive the strategy. And they thought that they knew what they wanted. It was a lot of events,
Hmm.
event-based marketing at the time, and being able to change their minds and implement campaigns and implement really great content and insightful customer interactions. And we did a customer advisory board, and just things that they had never done before to kind of bring customers together in a completely different way. So that was exciting, and kind of started my trajectory of educating people on what marketing is, because I realized, working in a consumer organization, everybody kind of knew, because marketing was sales in those organizations, versus in a B2B, there is a very clear sort of distinction and perception about what role does marketing play versus what role does sales play. And so I loved being the bridge of that gap and building those relationships with sales. And in fact, I was, one of the only marketers always to go attend sales training. And so, I would show up and everybody's staring at me like, why is there a marketer here in the room? And I'm
Right.
like, you guys, we want the same thing. We're both trying to get customers. We're just doing it in a different way. I'm thinking longer term, bigger, mass kind of programs, and you're thinking one-on-one, but I'm like, we ultimately want the same thing. So
Yeah.
when, and once I understood the sales process and could speak their language, like my credibility went way up with the sales organization. So that was,
I think that's
you
very
know,
insightful because I think oftentimes when talking with other marketers, when you're on the B2C side, focusing on consumers, sometimes the levers that you pull can have faster results, right? The things that you do, the promotions that you run, you can see the results very quickly. When you're in a relationship selling world in the B2B thing side, when you're selling larger dollar products or services, sometimes it's a slow grind, right? You could have 12, 18-month sales cycles for some of these products where marketing plays a bigger role in terms of that customer journey. And
Mhm.
it's different. It can be frustrating waiting to see the results of some of your activities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I have this conversation on a weekly basis of like, what's the one thing that we can do and what's the one thing that we can measure for marketing that's going to, show our ROI. And I have to explain that it's not one thing. Think about how you make purchases. You don't just see one thing and then go buy something, especially in B2B. It's like you're interacting with 10 different pieces of content, you're doing your own research, you're talking to peers, you're posting in communities, you're maybe DMing or calling old colleagues. You're scrolling through LinkedIn and social media. And there's so many different types of tactics and content that you interact with that it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint it all back to one thing that, everybody
Yes.
wants a silver bullet. And I'm like, there is no silver bullet. The magic is in the integrated plan.
Attribution is so difficult in marketing, especially for complex sales cycles. And I love
Mhm.
the way you sort of segued into this whole idea of a plan and strategy. As you work with these clients now that you're performing fractional CMO duties, what do you look at in terms of planning strategy? What is the importance of building out that strategy first before you sort of move on to that executional phase?
Yes, well, this is my favorite part. So I actually have a framework that I call the B2B marketing blueprint. It's 8 steps, and the first step is an audit. So I typically start with an audit, and I love to just kind of dive in, and I talk to the leadership team. I talk to beyond marketing. I talk to, the key stakeholders. If it's our product or sales or customer success. HR now is even becoming a big stakeholder for marketers because of employer branding, and that's now falling on into the marketing realm. So I look at, a few things right off the bat, which is one, how often is research done? Does anybody own customer research or competitor research or market research? Is this informal or formal? Oftentimes I find, especially this was a big difference too from B2C to B2B. In B2C, we had big budgets that we spent on customer research. So we were conducting our own research. We were doing focus groups. We were hiring research firms to call people, to get their insights, surveys, and then we also purchased a bunch of third-party data that we could overlay onto our own findings. But then when I switched over to B2B, I realized a lot of marketing budgets don't have customer research at all. And in fact, they rely on the sales team. So, if you want to know about your customers, go ask the sales team or go ask, a client facing organization. So I think marketing sometimes is super far removed from the customer in B2B. So I always recommend research there, because that's a way to kind of get them more educated and more knowledgeable about the customer base, but also kind of the credibility goes way up once marketing can sit there and represent the customer. So I look at research, I look at targeting. Do they have a really clear view of the ideal customer profile? Do they know who their customer segments are? Is it really, do you have clear goals for each of those customer segments? Oftentimes there's a huge disconnect between what management says, what the sales team is doing, what the marketing team is doing. And it all comes back to the fact that we all have a different view of what the ideal customer profile is. Then I also look at goals. And so specifically to marketing, are there clear marketing goals? Do you have specific tactics aligned with those goals? Rather than, the sprinkling effect that I call, like, we got on Twitter and that didn't work. And then we got on Facebook and that didn't work. And then we dabbled in LinkedIn and then we tried some ads on Google and then we did that. And so all of a sudden you're like sprinkled all over the place and nothing is working. One, because there's no focus, and that there's no really integrated strategy, but two, they probably just didn't get long enough to actually build momentum, right? To build the foundation, build momentum, and have clear intentions and clear goals as to why you're doing it. The other thing I look at is value proposition. So I co-wrote a couple of books. One of them is Valueology. It's about how to write and compose and conduct research to figure out what your value proposition is. So I look at value proposition relative to competitors. Like, a lot of times, I think companies believe that they know what makes them different.
Absolutely.
And why customers chose them. And, from my experience doing customer research, like 9 times out of 10, there's a disconnect between that. So the company will say one thing, and then the customer will say, actually, well, the value they give me is something typically that the customer doesn't think about, right? It's something higher level, it's bigger picture, it's tied to something a little bit more meaningful in the customer's world versus, what the client typically is saying. It's all about some random product feature or some small little differentiator. So it's about building that bridge for value propositions. And then I'm trying to think what the next thing is after the content plan. So we go through some depth on content planning, and that goes back to that sprinkling effect. Do you have the customer journey mapped out? Are you creating content for each stage of that journey, and does it make sense? And then finally, the last 2 sort of steps, I look at execution plan. Is it realistic? Do they have a realistic execution plan? Do they have the right resources, the right budget, the right, internal versus external sources to help get the work done? Do they have the right marketing technology? Kind of just a quick little outline of that, because I think sometimes, again, people take on, it's really easy. I could go start a TikTok channel right now as we're sitting here on this, but it's very difficult to maintain that over time, right? And to consistently show up over and over. And so I like to look at sort of the execution plan. And then finally, the last thing, which I think is pretty, it's really never talked about in marketing, but it's a huge skill set. And this is actually one of the main skills that we saw when we did some research for my other book, Standout Marketing. 5 key competencies that it takes modern marketers to stand out. And it's the ability to get buy-in. It's the internal alignment. How are they communicating internally? How is everybody informed about what marketing's doing and on the same page with timelines and setting expectations, and not just saying yes to, hey, let's go start a TikTok channel. Okay, I'll get right on it. No, pause. Why do you want to do that? What are the key objectives? How do we know if it's working? What's our timeline of, like, how much time are we going to give ourselves to experiment with this before we either go full force or kill it? And so I love looking kind of at the alignment piece, because it usually shows some type of, opportunity to build better relationships internally and socialize and communicate. So
I think, what you said, that was a lot. You packed a lot in there, and I couldn't agree more with the points that you made there. First of all, having a data-driven approach, really understanding your target market, the ideal customer profile. You are so right that so many organizations, if you really dig into it, it's gut feel, it's past experiences on some leads that have come in, but it's not really data driven. They don't really understand. They haven't done that market research. And so I love the fact that you put that at the front end of your process to really identify those things. Because frankly, you can't measure unless you really understand what metrics you're going after. You can't really understand whether your marketing is effective. And I would also agree that so many organizations tie a bunch of disconnected activities together because they don't have that plan, that strategy in place. And so they're just randomly executing tactics and wondering why it's not successful. So I love the way you laid that out and articulated that process. For your own business, I'm always fascinated when you start out. What has been your experience sort of going from that corporate world to now being an independent business owner at generating your own leads? Have you been able to see the effects of these marketing strategies work for your own business? Are you like many other business owners who, you get those first couple referrals from existing clients and then build from there?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So, yes and yes. I started off with getting referrals, mostly kind of tapping into my former employers.
Sure.
My first client actually was the client, the employer I was working with, and so I said, "I'm leaving. I don't exactly know what my whole business looks like, but I'd love for you to be my first client." And they said, "Okay, yeah, we love what you're doing. So, can you keep doing it?" And so I did that for a while, and then it forced me to I think in frameworks. So I love like the process and steps and kind of productizing and packaging up. And I think that's been the hardest part just with when you're selling a marketing service. Like I'm not an
Yes.
agency. I'm not selling at the end of this engagement you're going to have a brand new website. At the end of this engagement you're going to have a brand new pitch deck. I'm selling like strategy, and it feels very intangible for people. And so
Sure.
that's why I kind of go through that audit process. I have a visual that I created that shows sort of the steps that we go through, and I think people can then grasp that and understand it. Um, and so ultimately, I think what has happened is yes, a lot of I have a lot of my network that still is in the corporate world. So I continue to get referrals and business from that, from my experience corporate and how people knew me. And so, one thing I would say is I neglected my own personal brand for a while because I didn't really want to be a personal brand. I didn't really understand that. But then, I've co-authored a couple of books. It kind of forced me a little bit out of my comfort zone to build more of a profile rather than kind of hiding behind a brand. I mean, I was always used to building brands for other companies, not necessarily for myself. And so, but when you're consulting or when you're doing fractional CMO work, I mean, people are ultimately buying you
That's
and
right.
not necessarily the company. And so that's been my transition over the past year is kind of moving away from my brand of, Shake Marketing the company into building more of that personal brand, being more active on LinkedIn. And I would say I'm trying all the tactics.
Hmm.
We've had really good luck with doing our own research and publishing white papers. That helps. That's insightful. That gets people, teaching them something that they might not be thinking about. The books have been helpful because it kind of forces you to go through the process of just like doing the brain dump and getting everything on paper. And then plus at the end of this, you have a tangible thing that you could send to people. Um, and then, yeah, I just a lot of right now what's working is LinkedIn. Like I'm
Yes.
pretty active on LinkedIn lately, doing podcasts and trying to expand the community and just building relationships. We're constantly reminding myself to be patient and that, relationship building takes time and it's not something that, I'm never a big fan of kind of that, copy paste, email, sending the same email to 1,000 people. It's really more one-on-one. That's kind of been my approach.
Well, you talked before about data and doing research. And I think one of the challenges that solopreneurs or very small businesses have is they tend not to have the volume to create anything that's all that's statistically significant, right? When they're doing research on the types of leads that they're generating or whatnot. So many people in this line of work, they take their past industry experience and say, okay, I worked for a telecom company, so my niche is now going to be telecom. Is that sort of how
Mhm.
you approached it, or did you really uh, design your business to go after a certain market for a different reason? How did you pick your niche?
Yeah, I think initially I did not, I'm probably not a good example of, I'm like what people say not to do. Everybody's like, start a side gig and build your whole business plan. I didn't have any of that. I had a logo and I did have like a shell of a website because I felt like that was important. If I was going to be representing marketing, the bare minimum that I needed was to look like a real company. And so I did that first, but then really you're playing an active sales role. And so I think
Mhm.
my years of going through the sales training and traveling with the sales team really came into play there because I got to then practice it for myself. And and I loved it. And I really love the sales side, probably more or equally to marketing. So I'm constantly going back and forth between the marketing and the sales hats. But I think I wanted to I think two things. One, I'm very careful, and I give this advice to people who are just starting off their marketing career, that be careful of the industry that you pick to start your first job in, because people, right or wrong, will perceive that that's the only expertise you have, and you'll get
That's
kind of
right.
pigeonholed into that industry if you're not careful. So I'm like, if you don't like healthcare, like I would stay away, or financial services, highly regulated industries, like people don't leave. In fact, the two jobs that I had in financial services, it was very difficult for me to get into that industry because the perception was, you don't understand our industry, you don't have any regulatory experience. And I had to really sell them and convince them that marketing is marketing. The process is the same, the foundation, the
Yes.
steps are the same, regardless if I have to go through some regulatory hoops or not. And so I think so. That's one thing. The other thing is I really like variety. I'm a person that thrives on change, and so I knew for a fact that I could not declare and choose like one industry only. So
Yes.
I actually love working in a variety of industries, and really because it's just like a challenge to me because of my background and experience. I'm like, I want to teach these people marketing and
Yeah.
show them how to do it and how to do it right. So right now I work, it started with telecom, of course, because that's where my background was. But then it because I had some network and contacts in fintech and then software, and then and I do a lot of professional services as well, like helping people turn their service, their process, like into IP and into something that they can go package up and sell. So that's kind of my niche right now. But I would say like the thing that I love doing, and I work with startup companies, and then I have even like a couple of Fortune 500, a Fortune 100 company that I'm working with, and I'm like, what in the world do these things have in common? And I realize it's the thing they had in common is that I'm working within a business unit at some of these larger companies where marketing is neglected. They
Mm.
typically have, and they look very similar to a startup where the process, or a scaling organization, that the first hire is always sales. And then marketing comes later and is seen as like an executor. Hey, all of a sudden we need collateral, or we need a website, or we need something, and therefore we hired a marketer. And so that's the thing that these now kind of, they're not really a niche, but it's more of like a characteristic. What do these things have in common? It's that they don't have a marketing foundation. They don't have marketing people or expertise. Marketing is typically, if they have marketing resources, they're typically reporting to a non-marketer. And that non-marketer is like a self-declared, like, I have no idea what we're doing for marketing. Like, please come in. We need help. And there's
Yes.
always sales teams. You have a sales team yelling and demanding things, and then you have this other side where they can't really fulfill it, and they don't understand there's how to build the bridge between the two functions. So
Well,
that's where I'm
I
at
think you
now.
said something very interesting, and I've heard this from a lot of other marketers, certainly experienced it myself, is that there is this perception when you go and hire a marketer that they have to have detailed experience within your particular industry. And as marketers, we're sort of always fighting against that a bit. I do believe that there are significant differences between B2B and B2c marketing. You could probably argue that if you're marketing to, the government or the public sector, that that's a fairly unique space. E-commerce, if you're trying to set up online shops and things like that, that's a pretty unique skill set as well. But by and large, it doesn't really matter if you've got experience in telecom or financial services or whatever the industry may be. By and large, marketing skills translate across a very broad spectrum of industries. And it's part of our job as marketers to explain why that experience that we may have had in a different industry is very appropriate for the industry that the client comes from. I'm interested to hear too, do you feel that the concept of a fractional CMO is well understood, or at least is catching on more than it was? And to sort of piggyback on that, when you have a new client come to you, what is generally the problem that they're expressing? Why are they coming looking for services? Because chances are they're not saying, I need a fractional CMO, right? They've got some other problem that they need solved. How do you view that?
Yes. So a couple of things. One, I just to go back to something you said about the industry experience. We did this research for our book, Standout Marketing, that was all about, we called it the sea of sameness, how to stand out in the sea of sameness. And one of the practices that we found, the reason the sea of sameness is persisting in industries is because they tend to, people move around in the industry. So it's like I work
Yes.
at one company, then I go work with another company, and I implement the exact same playbook. And so I think there is a for sure value proposition that fractional CMOs bring to those organizations to say, I can give you perspective of how other industries are doing things that may give you a competitive advantage. Because when
Hmm.
everybody in the industry looks the same, the one that looks different or does something different is the one that stands out. So just wanted to say
Very
that.
true.
Um, and then your question was about,
Yeah. Do people
remind
understand
me.
what a fractional CMO is,
Yes.
and what do companies typically come to you asking for?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. Of two sides of the equation. I think number one, it's all about growth. So a lot of the companies that I work with they have growth goals, they have aggressive targets, revenue targets, sales targets. They don't necessarily know how to achieve them. They typically have a sales function, which is like that one-on-one combat, but they don't have any air cover. And so they recognize we need some air cover. And maybe there's a problem within the sales organization that either they're transactional sales folks, or there's a lot of turnover in the sales organization because they can't hit the quota. Like something's wrong, something's missing. And really, I go back to that strategic framework. It's because everybody skipped all the steps. No, there's no targeting, there's no research, there's no value proposition, there's no content. It's like all of that was skipped in favor of like, just start calling, just start posting random stuff on social media and try to find some people. So that's really the problem that I solve, is to give them kind of that foundation and framework and that air cover. And I think so that's kind of one side. They're either growing, or two, they want to launch into a new market or launch a new product, but they don't necessarily know where to start. How do we choose the market we want to launch into, or how do we demonstrate that we're successful? All of our contacts and all of our experiences in this one segment, but now we want to work in another segment. What should we do? And so that's again sort of all that strategic foundational work of like segmentation, targeting, positioning, value prop, all of that comes into play. And they typically don't have internal resources to do it. And
Yes.
so, I love working with the organizations. In fact, like this is how I choose people. I don't want to, I spent 14 years in corporate America. Okay, I did my fair share of battling internally, right? And all of the buy-in and the collaboration and education that is required. Now, being on the other side, I get to choose the type of clients I work with. So if they don't understand marketing and they have no value for marketing, and they're going to fight, and be defensive and overly opinionated, like we're not going to be a good fit, right?
Yes.
Because I'm like, you have to be open to feedback and open to suggestions, and you have to admit and be humble enough to know like that you don't have a plan, or that you don't know what you're doing, and then we can work together. Because on the other side, it's like if you're kind of like a know-it-all, then you keep doing what you're doing, right? And
Yes.
call me in a year or two after you've wasted $500,000, and then I'll come in. And that does typically happen. Companies
Hmm.
get really frustrated with wasting a lot of money on marketing. So they're a little gun shy, right? Because
Yes.
a lot of them hire an agency. I saw an ad for this agency, or I saw so and so, and they promised me all these leads. And they promised me, and now it's the agency's fault. And I'm like,
Yes.
well, let's go back to the strategic steps here. Did you do any of this stuff? No. Okay, then why in the world would you expect your agency to work miracles when you skipped 6 steps? Like, it
Yes.
doesn't make any sense. So So that's what I'm seeing now. I think there's an angle of like growth and I think the other piece, the fractional CMO, I have not been challenged with explaining that or setting it
Good.
up. I actually, because again, I came from consulting, so I actually kind of present it in a couple of different ways to say it could be a consulting project with a start and an end, and we have very specific deliverables, and then I'm out. Or it could be a fractional CMO gig where I'm going to help you build the strategy, and then I'm going to oversee the execution. I'm not doing the execution, but I will help either your people or we will bring in resources, but I will oversee it and orchestrate it for you. So I'm
Yes.
very, yeah, selective, I think, on those, what I propose, but that's kind of how I explain it is
No, I think that's
it could,
important because it's not an agency engagement, right? It's a strategy engagement and then managing the
mhm.
resources. And Stacey, as we're kind of coming to the end of our show here, I'd love it if you could also just talk briefly about SOAR, the Marketing Society. Talk about what that is, and is that something that people are open to join?
Yes, absolutely. So everybody is invited. Please, please, please join us. It's we'll send out the link, but it's soarmarketing.club/soar, SOAR. And what it is it's a private B2b marketing community where our whole entire goal is to help provide a forum for people to connect. And I wanted to make sure that it was not just for, like, I know there's a couple of communities that are only for B2B marketers who work in a corporate, right? Or only B2B marketers who are in an agency. And I actually wanted to bring both together because I think we all have so much to learn from each other. So we have a really diverse group of, marketing executives in there, marketing consultants and agency folks, fractional CMOs. I mean, kind of the whole gamut there. And so we do monthly, bi-monthly events and topics all aimed at helping marketers think and act more strategically. So we don't get into like super tactical things, but these are more like big picture. How do we get a CEO to understand what marketing is? How do we have a relationship with the CFO, right? How do we build relationships with the sales team? So there's a lot of behind the scenes, I guess, stuff that's not really typically talked about when it comes to what does it take to be successful in a B2B marketing role. So that's what we're trying to tackle.
No, I think that's great. I think that's kind of the mission of this podcast as well, to really bring a community of people together, help share our knowledge, help educate people in the process. So, yeah,
Love
congratulations
it.
on that. I joined that a few weeks back and am going to enjoy being a participant in that going forward. One last question here before we wrap up the interview. I would love it if you could just share with the audience a little bit more about your ideal client. So if they're looking for fractional CMO services, what is the ideal client that should come to you? And then share with us where they can find you on the web.
Yes. Yeah. So my ideal client is really either like somebody on an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company list, somebody who wants to grow and get to the next level, but is confused about how to do it, and so they need some help with building that foundation. And they may have one or two marketers on their staff that are smart and eager and motivated, but they just don't have the right guidance. They report into a non-marketer, and they're not getting that strategic guidance that's necessary. Because I love sort of that mentoring part, and I actually have a mentoring program that just launched for B2B marketers, kind of in that marketing manager space who want to get to the next level of their career.
That's excellent. And where can they find you on the web?
Yeah, so connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best place. And then you can reach out from there. But it's Stacey Danheiser on LinkedIn, and my company is Shake Marketing. It's shakemktg.com.
That's excellent. We will make sure to have all of that linked up in the show notes so that people can find you. They can find out more about the Soar Marketing Society as well. Stacey, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the program. I love talking about fractional CMOs and how they can help businesses. So thank you so much again for your time today.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Bye, everyone.